Ladies and gentlemen, oatmeal, it's the poster child for a healthy breakfast. Doctors recommend it. Labels praise it. Supermarkets dedicate entire aisles to it. But here's what most people don't know. It's not the oats, it's what we do to them that rewires our biology in the wrong direction. Today, I'm going to break down 10 oatmeal mistakes that silently sabotage your energy, focus, metabolism, and brain performance, and how to correct them using real neuroscience. Mistake 1, you choosing instant oats over steel cut or rolled oats are ultra-processed, rapidly absorbed, and spike glucose fast. That's a recipe for a morning crash. When blood sugar spikes, insulin floods in and you feel foggy, fatigued, and hungry within 2 hours. Steel-cut oats contain more resistant starch and fiber, slowing digestion and supporting more stable blood glucose curves. Mistake 2, skipping protein oats alone won't provide essential amino acids to support dopamine and acetylcholine production. Neurotransmitters, you need to stay motivated and focused. How do we? Pair oats with Greek yogurt eggs or a plant protein scoop. Without protein, you're not just hungry sooner, you're impairing cognitive signaling. Mistake 3G, no fat, no satiety. Fat doesn't just slow digestion, it fuels hormone production, supports brain myelination, and stabilizes your appetite, regulating peptides. Top your oats with walnuts, flaxseed, or MCT oil. Without this, your brain doesn't get the "I'm full" message from ghrelin suppression. Mistake 4, too much sugar or honey. Adding brown sugar or honey creates a dual glucose loam from the oats and the sugar. This leads to increased glycation, mitochondrial stress, and even higher post-meal insulin. Over time, this dulls insulin sensitivity and taxes your energy system. Instead, use cinnamon berries or monk fruit for sweetness. Mistake 5, you eat oats every day without rotation. Your microbiome thrives on variety. Eating the same oats daily feeds only a narrow set of gut microbes, starving the rest. This weakens gut-brain signaling and shortens microbial diversity, which influences serotonin production and immune balance. Cycle in quinoa, buckwheat, or even savory breakfasts for biome strength. Now, why does this matter? Because food isn't just fuel, it's instruction. Every molecule you consume is interpreted by your neurons, your hormones, your mitochondria. When you skip protein, ignore fiber, or dump sugar into your oats, you're not just eating. You're programming your system toward inflammation, cognitive fatigue, and emotional dysregulation. But here's the empowering truth: the brain is always listening. With small changes, like switching to steel cut, adding chia seeds, and rebalancing your macronutrients, you can transform oatmeal from a metabolic trap into a cognitive enhancer. You don't need to quit oats. You need to rewire how you consume them. Eat smart, think sharp, train your biology to work for you. Thank you. You do wake up, pour a bowl of oatmeal, and feel like you've already won the morning, but your neurons may be telling a different story. That warm bowl meant to energize and fuel you might actually be setting off a silent chain reaction that hijacks your dopamine system, distorts your energy map, and pulls your brain into a slump before noon. The very first bite sends a signal cascade through your taste receptors to the nucleus accumbens, your brain's reward hub, lighting it up briefly, but without the macronutrient depth or neurochemical support to sustain dopamine firing. The initial reward quickly turns into a depletion signal. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about drive and motivation. And when a breakfast floods your system with glucose but lacks the amino acid precursors like tyrosine or the cofactors magnesium and vitamin B6 to synthesize dopamine sustainably, you get the spike without the staying power. The ventral tegmental area communicates this imbalance downstream to the prefrontal cortex, impacting executive function, decision-making, and even emotional regulation as your morning progresses. Oatmeal, when consumed improperly, becomes a neurochemical misfire, driving up insulin, flattening cortisol rhythms, and uncoupling your reward system from your metabolic state, creating a mismatch that primes you for distraction, fatigue, and cravings that further suppress baseline dopamine tone while reinforcing a cycle of short-term reward chasing and long neural depletion through maladaptive reinforcement learning loops embedded in the mesolimbic circuitry. When you consume highly processed or sugary oatmeal first thing in the morning, the gastrointestinal tract rapidly digests the simple carbohydrates, flooding the bloodstream with glucose, which in turn activates pancreatic beta cells to release a surge of insulin. This insulin accelerates glucose uptake into peripheral tissues, especially skeletal muscle and liver, but when not counterbalanced by adequate fiber, fat, or protein, it leads to a sharp drop in blood glucose, reactive hypoglycemia, that directly impacts the brain cells to steady energy glucose transport across the blood-brain barrier through GLT1 and GLUT3 transporters. Simultaneously, elevated insulin downregulates lipolysis, restricting access to ketones that could serve as backup brain fuel, while also suppressing orexin neurons in the lateral hypothalamus that are essential for maintaining wakefulness. alertness, and energy balance. This hypoglycemic dip activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, prompting a compensatory release of cortisol and epinephrine, which may help raise glucose transiently, but at the cost of increasing systemic stress signaling. Chronic repetition of this pattern can desensitize insulin in peripheral tissues, reduce hippocampal neurogenesis via insulin like growth factor 1, IGF-1 resistance, and impair synaptic plasticity by blunting brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF expression pathways. Simultaneously, a low-protein oatmeal meal fails to deliver sufficient amounts of phenylalanine and tyrosine, the amino acid precursors needed for dopamine and norepinephrine synthesis through the rate-limiting enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase, which depends on iron, vitamin C, and tetrahydrobopterin as cofactors, disrupting catecholamine balance and reducing neuronal firing rates in the prefrontal cortex and ventral tegmental area, undermining motivation, goal-directed behavior, and memory encoding. Picture this: the moment your spoon dips into that steaming bowl of oatmeal, a signal cascade begins to unfold. Taste receptors on your tongue fire rapidly, sending electrical impulses through the glossopharyngeal and facial nerves into the brainstem, triggering the release of anticipatory dopamine from the ventral tegmental area like a spark lighting up a dark tunnel. Your reward system lights up with transient satisfaction, but as the sugars rush into your bloodstream, you can almost see the glucose curve rising sharply like a wave preparing to crash. Inside your gut, enteroendocrine cells flood your system with GLP-1 and GIP, pushing insulin out of pancreatic beta cells with a 4 resembles gates opening on a dame. Too much, too fast. As glucose is shuttled into your cells, the curve drops suddenly, leaving your neurons for scrambling for stability, their ATP levels dipping just enough to dull the firing of your prefrontal cortex. Imagine the energy draining from your brain like a dimming light bulb in a flickering room, your mental clarity replaced by a soft fog. Simultaneously, inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 and F-alpha begin to rise if the oatmeal lacks antioxidants and polyphenols, subtly corroding neural efficiency like rust on circuitry. Your hippocampus, responsible for memory and learning, begins to slow its oscillatory rhythm like a record player slightly off speed, while the hypothalamus interprets the glycemic crash as a need state, activating hunger signals through neuropeptide Y and a goity-related peptide Y, creating a sensory illusion of emptiness despite caloric fullness. This entire inner landscape, visible only at the microscopic level, plays out every time your breakfast isn't structured to stabilize your glucose-insulin axis, support neurotransmitter synthesis. How do we? And maintain balanced energy signaling within your brain's most vital networks. In the first hour after waking, your body is designed to operate on the momentum of circadian biology, tightly regulated rhythm governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus SCNN in the hypothalamus, which synchronizes hormonal output to align with light exposure feeding times and physical activity. Cortisol levels peak within 3.5 minutes after waking, part of the cortisol awakening response cart intended to mobilize glucose, prime alertness, and elevate immune surveillance. And yet when you consume a bowl of high glycemic oatmeal without sufficient fat or protein, you override this natural hormonal surge with an artificial insulin spike that flattens the amplitude of cortisol's diurnal rhythm, compromising its metabolic synchrony for the rest of the day. The misalignment between external nutrient timing and internal hormonal flux begins to dysregulate circadian gene expression across peripheral clocks. In the liver, pancreas, adipose tissue, and skeletal muscle, reducing the efficacy of glucose transporters like GLT-4 and impairing mitochondrial oxidative capacity at a cellular level. As melatonin is still clearing from the bloodstream in early morning hours, introducing fast digesting carbohydrates can blunt the transition into optimal sympathetic tone. Leading to a sluggish start and delayed catecholamine signaling, especially norepinephrine release from the locus coeruleus, which is needed to sharpen cognitive focus. Meanwhile, insulin secretion during high cortisol creates a functional antagonism in metabolic pathways, sending confusing signals to the hypothalamus about whether it is in a fasted or fed state, diminishing leptin sensitivity and disturbing ghrelin suppression. Over time, this repeatedly reduces circadian amplitude, shifts feeding-related thermogenesis, and alters core body temperature rhythms, which feed back into central clock signaling through the dorsomedial hypothalamus and impact not just metabolism, but also sleep architecture, inflammatory set points, and even mood regulation via serotonergic modulation in the dorsal raphe nuclei, making breakfast not merely a dietary decision, but a circadian intervention with ripple effects across your entire neuroendocrine landscape. Start by re-engineering your breakfast to align with your brain's metabolic wiring and capacity for adaptive change. Introduce targeted inputs that support neurotransmitter synthesis, stabilize blood glucose, and reinforce optimal signaling patterns between your gut endocrine system and prefrontal cortex. Replace instant oats with steel-cut or sprouted versions to slow carbohydrate absorption and provide beta-glucans that enhance SCF8 production in the gut, which in turn modulate microglial activation and promote BDNF expression in the hippocampus. Add a scoop of high-quality protein, like grass-fed whey, plant-based blends, or collagen peptides to supply essential amino acids such as tyrosine, tryptophan, and leucine, all precursors for dopamine, serotonin, and muscle protein synthesis. Engaging mTOR pathways critical for neuroplasticity repair. Include a tablespoon of flaxseed, chia, or walnuts to deliver omega-3s and lignans, which have been shown to upregulate expression of synaptic plasticity, related genes, and improve membrane fluidity, enhancing receptor sensitivity in neural networks. Sprinkle cinnamon to modulate glucose uptake via increased GUT4 translocation and lower postprandial inflammatory responses, reducing insulin-induced cognitive fog and preserving hypothalamic insulin signaling integrity. Incorporate prebiotic-rich fruits like blueberries or green bananas to support a microbiome that communicates through the vagus nerve to regulate GBA and serotonin production via microbial metabolites like butyrate and propionate. Eat in the first 60 to 90 minutes of waking to harmonize with cortisol's natural peak, reinforcing diurnal hormone patterns and anchoring circadian oscillators in peripheral tissues. Layer this routine with consistent sensory cues, natural light exposure during breakfast, slow nasal breathing, and focused attention while eating to create a behavioral loop that strengthens synaptic efficiency in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Rewiring habits not just around food, but around cognitive control and emotional resilience that extends through the rest of the day. The power to rewire your biology is already embedded in your daily routine, waiting to be activated through small, science-backed adjustments that reshape how your brain and body respond to food, time, environment. Your neurons aren't passive observers. They're dynamic agents constantly responding to the molecular signals you feed them. And every breakfast choice is a micro decision that trains the neural circuits of energy, focus, mood, and motivation. When you begin to understand that neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin are not abstract concepts, but the literal chemical messengers sculpted by your meal composition, when you realize that your mitochondria listen to the macronutrient ratios and micronutrient density of what's on your plate, when you grasp that your circadian rhythm isn't just a clock, but a networked system of gene expression that governs hormonal outputs, synaptic plasticity, and metabolic clarity, you unlock a kind of leverage over your biology that most people will never tap into. Neuroplasticity isn't limited to meditation or learning. It's influenced by whether your breakfast tells your body it's safe, energized, and clear, or chaotic, depleted, and inflamed. Every morning is a fresh window to reinforce resilience, to upregulate cognitive pathways, to dial down inflammation at the epigenetic level, and to train your physiology toward sharper thinking. How do we? Steadier energy and deeper emotional balance through nothing more complicated than a deliberate, scientifically aligned start to your day.